Please welcome to the stage, Teswall, why everybody?
Who remembers growing up as a teenager? Raise your hands if you remember what it was like. Okay. If anybody wants to give me a little bit of feedback here, what was it like for you growing up as a teenager? Just briefly. Was it challenging? Chaos? Fun? Confusing? Exciting? We've got a whole bunch of emotions there. If anybody's been obviously watching the news just over the last few weeks, obviously you can see that, there's a lot of discussion around serious youth violence that is impacting many communities up and down the country. And I myself, as a young person, struggled. I disengaged from education at a very early age. At 12 years old, I really struggled to relate to my teachers and to the education system. By the time I was 13 years old, I was out looking about theft, exploring things like doing robberies, and I even stuck up some young people with a knife. And I want to know really, what kind of, I suppose, drives some of this behavior where we have young people, children who are watching TV, Ben 10, Pokemon in one instance, and in just a matter of a few years really, engaging in serious youth violence, carrying knives, even being willing to really hurt people. I was once told that hurt people hurt people. And I believe that to be a true statement, a true sentiment of some of the trauma that young people experience and face. And so, one of the things that really helped me as I was going through my turbulent stages of growing up as a teenager was a youth worker. The youth worker impacted my life so much because they were able to kind of create the space for me to be able to really discover at a time, because let's face it, like I said, growing up as a young person can be quite challenging. You have lots of things going on. You got chemicals going off in your brain. You got an increase of dopamine flooding your system, and that leads you to take high risks with little regards for consequence. Now, if a young person's in the wrong environment, or even the right environment, that can mean so many different things. So taking risks, if you're in an area growing up in poverty, it might mean the risk that you're going to take might be carrying a knife, might be carrying a gun. I was quite distressed actually, because this week I was flicking through some of the news, trying to catch up with what's kind of been taking place in Birmingham, because there's been a lot of focus and attention on London. And in one of the clips that I saw on the Birmingham Mail, was the police had found some footage of somebody's phone. And what it showed was a young man walk over, He's got a gun in his hand. And the guy who's filming him on his phone says, "Go on, lad, cock it back and give it a good bang." This young man takes a few more steps over, bow! Fires off this shotgun. Now, they didn't actually catch the guy who fired off the shotgun, but they found out whose phone it belonged to and happened to give the person whose phone who was actually filming that particular incident. They caught up with him and they gave him several years, so that they covered that in the paper. So again, this dilemma of how do your children go from watching TV, Ben 10, and by the way, this wasn't central London we're talking about here. This wasn't even, notoriously as we have it as burger bars and Johnson's crew coming from Handsworth and Aston. This was Northfield. And the young man that was filming was a white young man. And the man that was holding the gun was another white young person. So when we start to look at the pattern of serious youth violence now that is spreading across the whole of the UK, believe me when I say no community is quite safe at this moment in time. And so one of the key things that I believe can really support what's taking place here is youth workers. But this is at a time where young people struggling with their identity, struggling to understand the world that they're growing up in and how to fit into that world. That's why my company, Activating Creative Talent, one of the things that we do is we go into schools and we deliver things like behavior intervention programs and exclusion prevention programs, where we create the space for young people to develop their identities. Because that's what young people really need. They need the space to formulate their identities. And believe me when I say, technology is having such an impact. We know technology is having an impact on the world. We're all experiencing it. But when I say technology is helping now, social media is helping now to shape the identities of our young people. And when you take a look at some of the feeds that young people are having to observe and go through, you can see why now young people will be willing to carry things like knives, because there's a real genuine fear. And the thing about technology and social media is that when we were growing up, you might get yourself into a little fight or a little situation, somewhere where you might be embarrassed, and that's one of the biggest things for a young person, being embarrassed, having their reputation tarnished. And what social media does is make that permanent, because if it's captured and shown again and again and again and again and again, there's a permanency. So we have to really consider the mediatization of the world that we now live in. And I suppose my concern really is that, many people seem to be quite detached from this. And so I want to try and give you a few solutions before I leave here today, because I'm a quite pragmatic person and I want to leave people with some solutions. And one of those is around building relationships with young people. We have this disparity between the adult world and youth culture, where typically we might see young people that might be looking a bit undesirable and not want to engage them. We might have teenagers growing up in our own home and not really understand what's going on in their world. Talk to the children. talk to those young people. Young people really do need adult support, but not adult in terms of oppressive, because the adult-child relationship can be quite oppressive. We need to be able to support young people. We need to be able to empower young people. And it's one of the reasons why I do what I do, to create those spaces so young people can help to form their own identities. I'll leave you with this quote. Well, we've all heard the quote, haven't we? We've all heard the quote that says, it takes a village to raise a child. You all heard that quote? Yeah. Well, I'll leave you with this one then. It not only takes a village to raise a child, but it takes a village to raise a killer. Thank you, everybody.